this was even happening, because it gives me
go home.
Yeah, we could do that too. But it gives us a chance to have a little intimate talk.
Can we order a pizza and sit around the table?
Yeah, I have no problem with that, actually. I got my credit card if somebody wants to dial in. So hi, I'm Michael. And we just did, it's really interesting. We just did this in San Diego. We just did this in New York. And the response was well promoted, and it was fascinating what happened.
It's always lackadaisical.
Something about LA, just laid back. So we're going to do a lot of Q&A. And if you guys will do what every year I teach a class at Indiana University's media school. If you guys will stay off the internet with what we discuss and agree to do that, then we can talk a little bit more openly about things.
Are we talking proprietary, or are we talking the stuff you do in class and you don't want your pedagogy out there?
It's both, actually.
Okay.
It's both, actually. And you'll have to actually sign something. I'm going to have to get a waiver from you.
I'm still putting out the David Niven who was Alfred.
Are you really that old? Oh my God. So let me kick it off this way. What do you do when you're burning with a passion? I mean, literally burning with a passion. I was the total comic book geek growing up. I went to the first Comic-Con ever held on the planet Earth. July 1964, the Fleabag Hotel in downtown New York called the Broadway Central. Probably the weekend of Lincoln's inauguration, this place was magnificent. But in July 1964, it was run down, a few years of collapsing on itself. There were roaches crawling on the walls, and my parents, who took me and my friend Bobby to this convention, we literally had to step over an unconscious drunk guy in the hallway. I don't think I need that.
Would you put it on for the recording and the live stream, sir?
Oh, there's a live stream. Well, that just kills us, doesn't it, in terms of what we can talk about?
So much.
Do we have to do live
No
streaming?
live stream.
Yeah, all right. Okay. Bear with me.
We have a few minutes after.
Sorry,
It's
guys.
the present and future of
Just-
fandom.
I didn't realize you had started, and I look up and
Well, just watch out for the Batman underoos.
and that could just go right in your
Great, thanks.
Right.
All right, so we're official. Well, no, I don't want this. Cut this out.
Well,
Thank you. Okay. I always have. So, I'm a kid. I'm a comic book geek. My mom said I learned to read from comic books before I was 4. When I graduated high school, I had over 30,000 comic books dating back to 1936. We moved into a new house in about 6th grade, and my dad never once was able to get his car in the garage. It was just floor to ceiling comic books. Actually, he did. And he sacrificed everything for me. My dad was a stonemason. My mom was a bookkeeper. I'm a blue-collar kid from New Jersey who has no mob connections. Very rare. But what my folks did, my dad built 3 walls of shelves, floor to ceiling, for my comic books. Every weekend, they took me around because I learned that the whole comic book industry was based in New York back then. And I learned that all of the creators, the writers, the artists, the editors lived in either New Jersey, Manhattan, or Long Island. And my dad worked 6 days a week. And he would take me on Sundays. He would drive me to these people's houses so I could interview the creators of Captain Marvel, or the creators of so many comic books that we all know and love. It was extraordinary, the sacrifices my folks made. I grew up in an era when comic books were under attack. In the mid-1950s, Dr. Frederick Wertham came out with a book called Seduction of the Innocent, and claimed that it was comic books that was the sole cause of post-World War II's rise of juvenile delinquency in America. In fact, Dr. Wertham went on to claim that any boy who read Batman and Robin would become a homosexual, any girl who would read Wonder Woman would become automatically a lesbian, and that comic books cause asthma. Well, no, it's true. I mean, you have to stay indoors to read them instead of playing in the fresh air.
All those dust mites and stuff. I could see the asthma one.
Yeah, I mean, it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? This is the era I grew up in, reading comic books. So I don't know of any of my other friends that were actually allowed to bring a comic book into the house, knowingly. But my mom actually sat down and read them. And then she made a deal with me that turned out to be the greatest deal I ever made in my life. She said, Michael, if you promise me you will read other things like books and magazines and newspapers, and if you keep your collection neat, you can keep these comic books. Greatest deal ever. It was awesome. And I'm burning with this passion. When I'm a kid, when I'm 8 years old, my goal in life was to one day write Batman comics. I was in love with Batman when I was 8 years old.
Who isn't?
Every boy and every girl who I know fell in love with Batman at some point in time. And why? For me, the magic was, unlike the Hulk or Superman or Spidey even, he was human. He's a superhero with no superpowers. And you can project yourself onto him. You can identify so strongly with Batman. And I'll tell you something, when I was 8 years old, I actually believed in my heart of hearts that if I studied really hard, and if I worked out really hard, and if my dad bought me a cool car, I could be this guy. So that was my dream at age 8. I told you I went to the first Comic-Con, July '64. It was an interesting comic book convention. The first one, there were 200 of us in attendance. 197 boys and 3 girls. Comics were not cool back then as far as girls were concerned. Not at all. In fact, when I was in high school, I was what I would refer to as being date challenged, when girls found out I was 17 and still reading and collecting comic books. This was an issue. So the first Comic-Con, the guy who created this whole concept was a high school senior who wore black leather and chains and had his hair slicked back. I was scared to death of this guy. I thought I was going to get knifed. He looked like Fonzie. And so he and another guy, an older guy he was talking to, what are we going to do on Saturday night when we've got 197 boys and 3 girls? And they said, let's just tell everyone, come dressed up as your favorite superhero and we'll give out prizes. That was the night Cosplay was born. July 1964, I was there in a costume my mom helped me make. Yeah.
I've seen it at science fiction conventions that predate it.
You're right. No, for science fiction conventions, there were costumes. But in terms of Comic-Cons,
Okay.
this was the first and this was the beginning of it. I love being challenged like this.
Maybe there's first cosplay contest too at a Comic-Con.
That very well could be. We can double check the history on that, but I think probably, well, it would have to be, really.
Yeah.
It would have to be.
I don't know about the Worldcon and stuff. I just know I've seen pictures.
Well, why didn't you ask me what costume I was in?
What were you wearing?
I was 1940 DC Comics Sandman with the gas mask and the fedora. And Castle of Frankenstein magazine, which I'm sure you were all original subscribers to here, they actually took pictures there that night. My picture was published in a magazine from way back when. Yeah, I was very excited.
Castle Frankenstein magazine, was it?
Castle of Frankenstein, annual number 2. Annual number 2. So I told you I'm geeky, right? Okay, so it's not just the tie and the shirt. Wait a minute. It's the Joker socks. And like I said, we won't talk about underoos here.
You get that stuff.
So that's how I grew up. So I wanted to do something with this comic book passion. You know, I grew up in a house, my dad, I told you, was a stonemason. My father had to drop out of high school when he was 16 to help his family survive the Depression and go to work. And he worked 6 days a week for the rest of his life. Yeah.
Just to complete the image, your parents native born or immigrants?
First generation.
Okay.
First generation.
No judgments. I was just wanted the full picture.
Grandparents from Minsk, Russia, and from Budapest, Hungary.
Gotcha.
Met in Bayonne, New Jersey. Very blue-collar town. And one of the kids who was also from Bayonne, who I used to call when I would go to visit my grandparents, because he was the only one in Bayonne who knew where all the comic book candy stores were that sold comics, was a guy in Bayonne. What the hell was his name? George R.R. Martin. Seriously. Seriously. He used to write letters to the editor in comic books, and they would print his address. I saw, oh my God, he's from Bayonne. So I opened up, there used to be this thick thing called a telephone book. I don't know if any of you know what that is. And I found him. Yeah, just like the telephone booths, the VCRs, you can find them all in museums now, although I still have my Betamax. So that was how I grew up and where I grew up. And my dad was working 6 days a week. Get up before dawn, didn't matter if it was 100 degrees New Jersey humidity or if it was snowing out. My father loved what he did. He was an old world artist. He was a craftsman. He made the most magnificent fireplaces out of brick and stone and cement. And when you grow up in a house like that, with a guy who gets out of bed every morning before dawn with a smile on his face and says, I can't wait to get to work, how could you not want that for yourself? And that was what was propelling me. So in high school, my brother and I started working for my dad in the summers, and it was awful. It was the worst thing you could ever imagine. We're tarring foundations in the heat. We're carrying bags of cement and bricks. It was awful. But epiphany number one in the life of me, oh my God, I need to find what my bricks and stones are. And for me, it's comic books. It's superheroes. It's movies. It's cartoons. It's Batman. But what do? I got all this passion in me. I'm a blue-collar kid in New Jersey, going off to college to Bloomington, Indiana, which we used to call the oasis in the desert. How do you jump the Grand Canyon?
Midwestern schools have trouble branding themselves. I went to Northwestern. It was like Harvard of the Midwest. It doesn't need a Harvard.
The only football team worse than ours, Northwestern. But yeah, but an
I don't take
excellent school. Excellent school nonetheless.
George R. R. Martin went there.
Everything's connected. It's part of the crisis on infinite Earths. So how do you get there from here? My first opportunity comes in my junior year of college at Indiana. It was the early 1970s, a time of great experimentation on college campuses, and that's about all I'm going to say on that. However, the College of Arts and Sciences, in response to the times, started what they called an experimental curriculum department. And here was the thing. If you had an idea for a college course that had never been taught before and could get the backing of a department on campus, you then had the right to appear before a dean and panel of professors and pitch it. And if they accepted it, if the dean blessed it, even though I was an undergrad, a junior, you could teach it on campus for 3 hours of credit. I said, why not? It's never been done before in history, a course on comic books at college. I mean, comic books are a legitimate American art form as indigenous to this country as jazz. Comic book superheroes are our modern day mythology. It's contemporary folklore. My theory, the ancient gods of Greece, Rome, and Egypt all still exist, except today they wear spandex and capes. And I went to the folklore department, spoke to Dr. Glassy there, and I said, Dr. Glassy, the Greeks called him Hermes, the Romans called him Mercury, I call him the Flash. The Greeks called him Poseidon, the Romans called him Neptune, I call him Aquaman. And he said, you're absolutely right. It doesn't matter if we call them King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table or the Avengers, it's still stories of brave heroes battling the demons and dragons of their day in stories of hope and in some cases redemption. He goes, I'll back you. So armed with a group of Superman and Batman comic books. No. Well, yes, in the course I did. Because undergrounds were just really erupting at that point in time.
But they're not exactly stories of hope and redemption.
No, I was talking about mainstream comics at the time. But I was in touch with Dennis Kitchen, who was just really starting the whole thing over there. So I go into the panel of professors. My hair's down to my shoulders. I've got a Spider-Man t-shirt on, and I've got my hippie love beads on. Thank you very much. And as I walk in, it's a dark conference room, mahogany everywhere, big conference room table in the middle, professors sitting around it, dean at the end. I thought I had just walked into the secret sanctum of the Justice League. And do you ever see an old person who has the pair of like little half glasses on the end of their nose? You know what I mean? Okay. So he's sitting there with that, and he looks down at me over his glasses and says, so you're the fellow who wants to teach a course on funny books at my university? I knew I was in deep shit. So I start the first pitch of my career. The dean lets me speak for approximately 2 minutes and then cuts me off. He says, Mr. Uslan, stop. He says, come on. I read comic books when I was a little kid. I read every issue of Superman I could get my hands on. But all comic books are cheap entertainment for little children. Nothing more, nothing less. I reject your theory. At that moment in time, I easily could have bowed my head, picked up my funny books, and turned around and walked out of the room. But figuring I had nothing to lose, I stood my ground in what would turn out to be an absolute life-changing moment for me. I said, Dean, may I ask you 2 questions? He said, ask me anything you want. I said, are you familiar with the story of Moses? And he looked at me like I was nuts. He said, well, yeah, so? I said, so Dean, could you just very, very briefly summarize the story of Moses for me? He folded his arms, sat back in his chair, said, Mr. Uslan, I don't know what game you're playing here, but I'll play this with you. He said, the Hebrew people were being persecuted. Their firstborn were being slain. A Hebrew couple placed their infant son in a little wicker basket and sent him down the River Nile. There he's discovered by an Egyptian family who raised him as their own son. When he grew up and learned of his true heritage, he became a great hero to his people, but I said, stop. Dean, thank you very much. You said before you read Superman comics when you were a kid. By any chance, do you remember the origin of Superman? He said, of course, the planet Krypton was about to blow up. A scientist and his wife placed their infant son in a little rocket ship and sent him to Earth. There he's discovered by the Kents who raised him as their own son. When he grows up and then he stops, stares at me for what I swear to you was an eternity and says, your course is accredited. I am now the world's first college professor of comic books. I can't believe I pulled it off. I am walking back to my apartment off campus. Call my mom. Tell her the good news. And of course, like every good mom, she says, Michael, you can have the greatest creative ideas in the world, but if you don't market them, if you don't market yourself, nobody will ever know about it. I'm a junior in Bloomington, Indiana, with virtually no money. What am I going to do? Figuring I have nothing to lose, I picked up a telephone. I called United Press International. At that time, it was as big a news agency as the Associated Press is today. I asked to speak to a reporter, and this poor man gets on the phone, and I proceed to scream at him. What is wrong with you? This is outrageous. You're not doing your job. You're supposed to be the watchdogs of this society. He goes, sir, calm down. What are you talking about? What am I talking about? Are you kidding me? I just heard there is a course on comic books being taught at Indiana University. Are you telling me as a taxpayer in this state, they're using my money to teach our children comic books? This has got to be a communist plot to subvert the youth of America, and I slammed down the phone. It took this poor guy 3 days to find out if IU really did have a course like this, and if it did, who is the lunatic teaching it? He shows up at my door with a photographer. They do an article. It's a third of a page long with pictures. It gets picked up by virtually every newspaper in North America, a whole bunch in Europe. My phone starts ringing and it never stops. I didn't teach one class that wasn't filled with television cameras and reporters. NBC Nightly News, the CBS Evening News. I had 4 reporters in row 1 and on my 3rd class. Parade Sunday Supplement Magazine. Family Weekly Sunday Supplement Magazine. Playboy and Penthouse. This just appealed to everybody. I'm about 2 weeks in, and my phone rings. It's an exuberant male voice. Hi, is this Mike Uslan? Yeah. Hiya, Mike. This is Stan Lee from Marvel Comics in New York City. I call this my burning bush moment. I was talking to my God. He said, Mike, everywhere I turn, I'm reading about you in newspapers, I'm watching you on television. What you're doing is great for the whole comic book industry. How can I help you? That would be the beginning of my relationship with Stan Lee for the rest of my life, where he became my mentor, my friend, my creative partner, and I already miss him terribly. 2 hours later, phone rings again. It's a dour male voice. Mr. Uslan, my name is Saul Harrison. I'm vice president of DC Comics in New York City. We publish Wonder Woman and Superman. I go, yeah, I'm Batman, I know. He goes, we've been listening to you on the radio. We've been reading about you in magazines. What you're doing is very bright and innovative, and we would like to work with a young, innovative man like you. So we'd like to fly you to New York City and discuss ways we might be able to do that. Oh my God, I'm in New York, DC Comics, fanboy, geek, dream come true moment. They offer me a job. They're going to let me work in New York. You know, I'm from North Jersey. It's an easy ride, fairly easy ride in. So I'll work there summers, and then they're going to put me on retainer when I go back to Indiana. I'm there 1 week, and it's getting to be like 6 o'clock at night, getting ready to wrap up to head back to Jersey. I hear yelling and screaming coming from the editor's offices down the hall. Sound like somebody was being murdered. I go charging down there. It's from the office of Denny O'Neil. I don't know if you guys know Denny's work. One of the greatest writers in the history of comics, as well as an editor. He was the one with Neil Adams who returned Batman to his dark roots in the 1970s. The Shadow was one of his great pieces with Mike Kaluta in the mid-70s. And he was the editor of the Shadow magazine. And you remember the Alec Baldwin Shadow movie from about 20 years ago, or the radio show? Bill Finger admitted that the Shadow was the greatest specific influence in the creation of Batman. So that gives you the mystique. All of the Shadow's adventures were set in the 30s or 40s. I go running down the hall. I go, Denny, are you all right? He goes, I am not all right. I go, what's going on? He goes, I just found out, they just told me there is a Shadow script due tomorrow. He goes, I don't have a Shadow script. I don't have a Shadow story. I don't even have an idea for a Shadow story. I said, I have an idea for a Shadow story. He said, you do? I didn't. But so what? I saw that door opened a crack like this, and I just shoved my foot in it. So they said, all right, come in, sit down. What's your idea for a Shadow story? I said, well, you're going to love it. It's really good. He goes, well, what is it? My wife and I, my girlfriend at the time, just had gotten back from a trip to Niagara Falls. So I said, you know, Niagara Falls, back in the 30s and 40s, people were going over the falls in barrels. And they were walking across the falls on tightropes. Picture the Shadow battling a bad guy on a tightrope over Niagara Falls at night, the floodlights going. He goes, I love it. That's a great cover. But what's the story about? I said, well, the story is about smuggling. He goes, well, Michael, what are they smuggling? I said, well, they are smuggling drugs. And he goes, but what's the creative take? There's got to be some kind of creative take here that's different. I said, Denny, I've been saving this for last because it's the best part. You see, they were going over the falls in barrels back then. False bottoms in the barrels, that's where they're putting the drugs. They're going over the Canadian side. They're washing up onto the American side. That's how they're getting it through. He goes, I like that. He goes, could you have a full script on my desk by 6 o'clock tomorrow night? I said, not a problem. He said, go do it. I'm now a writer for DC Comics. Next day, hand in my script. 2 weeks go by. I'm walking down the halls of DC. Remember, hair still down to here. Still wearing my funny geeky shirts. And coming toward me, the most important editor, arguably, in the history of comics, a man named Julie Schwartz. Julie was the guy who brought us the Silver Age Flash, Green Lantern, Justice League, Hawkman, Atom, and was in charge of Denny and Neil Adams returning Batman to his darker roots. Julie was gruff. Once he got to know me, he was kind of a marshmallow, but he was kind of gruff. And he sees me coming, he goes, hey, kid. I go, yes, Julie. I read your Shadow script. You did? Yeah. It didn't stink. I go, wow, thank you. Thank you so much.
Weisinger wouldn't have said that.
No, he would have just thrown me through a window. Julie said to me, how'd you like to take a shot at writing Batman? I still get the chills. My dream that I had since I was 8 years old came true. I was writing Detective Comics. When that first issue came out, amid the tears, yes, the tears, was panic. Oh my God, this dream I had since I was 8 years old had come true. I don't have a dream. I need a new dream. What's it going to be? Took 10 minutes for this next epiphany because I remembered back to a cold, cold January night in 1966. I was downstairs in our den. Couldn't wait. I've been waiting months for this night. It was the premiere of the Batman TV series. Oh boy, here it comes. Oh, it's in color. Oh, they're spending a lot of money on these sets. Oh, the car is cool. The animation kind of looks like Bob Kane, Jerry Robinson. 20 minutes in, it hits me. Oh my God, this is a comedy. They're making fun of my Batman. The whole world is laughing at Batman. And as a hardcore comic book fan, that killed me. And that night, downstairs in our den, I made a vow. I made a vow like Bruce Wayne once made a vow. except he did it over the slaughtered bodies of his parents in the street. My parents were safe upstairs in the kitchen. I said, somehow, someday, I am going to show the world the true Batman.
You raised your fist while you did this.
No, it was more than that. It was like I tried to duplicate the end of Act 1 of Gone with the Wind. You know? So it was that moment. I will find some way to show the world the true Batman, the dark, serious Batman, the creature of the night who stalks seriously disturbed criminals in the shadows, and will attempt to erase these three new words out of the collective consciousness of the world culture. Pow, zap, wham. But how am I going to do this? I am a blue-collar kid from New Jersey. I don't know anybody in Hollywood. I can't buy my way into Hollywood. I have no relatives in Hollywood. How do you jump the Grand Canyon? How do you make your dreams come true? Well, I go back to Saul Harrison, the man who mentored me into the comic book industry. He's now the president of DC Comics. I said, Saul, I'm only a kid in my 20s, folks. I go, Saul, I want to buy the rights to Batman and show the world the true Batman and make dark and serious Batman movies. The color drained from his face. He said, Michael, for God's sake, don't do this. He goes, don't you understand? Since Batman went off the air, the brand is as dead as a dodo. Nobody's interested in Batman anymore. I said, yeah, but nobody's ever seen a comic book movie, a superhero movie, done in a dark and serious way. It's going to be like a new form of entertainment. He said, is there any way I can talk you out of this? I go, no. He said, all right, schmoozle, come on in. That began a 6-month negotiation. Meanwhile, I needed to find a partner who knew how to make movies, who knew how to mount a production. And I found the greatest partner in the world. His name was Ben Melniker. He was my dad's age. Ben started at MGM in 1939, the year of Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz. All divisions at MGM reported to Ben. He was chairman of their film selection committee. He put together the deals for movies, and if you haven't seen them, please put them down on your list. Check it out. Ben-Hur, Dr. Zhivago, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Gigi and all their musicals in the 50s and 60s. A legend.
Those were Arthur Freed.
He what?
Those were Arthur Freed.
Arthur Freed was the producer.
Okay.
Arthur Freed was the producer. Ben was the guy running MGM.
Okay.
So,
What year was that, by the way?
which year?
Year at MGM that
Ben started at MGM in 39 and was there till 72.
and you were talking to him?
79.
Okay.
So Ben became my partner. During that 6-month negotiation, we raised money privately, and on October 3rd, 1979, 40 years ago this past week, we signed the deal, we paid the money, and me, a kid in my 20s, buys the rights to Batman. It's inconceivable today. It's impossible today. But now that you know the story and understand it in the context of the time, you understand the very unglamorous answer to the question, how does a kid in his 20s buy the rights to Batman? I was the only one on the planet Earth who showed up.
Can I say something?
Absolutely.
I worked at MGM and 20th Century Fox way back in the day, 73 was there. We unrolled old backdrops from MGM stock. One of them had maybe this wide going up 15, 20 feet, the Yellow Brick Road.
Oh my God.
The backdrop had been painted over for another movie, but you could still see the Yellow Brick Road, and part of it was there. And it had not been painted, and you know what we did? We cut it off and we threw it away. And that's how people thought in those days.
Same thing in the comic book industry. Joe Simon was a dear friend and mentor of mine. Simon and Kirby, they created Captain America. I said to Joe one day, Joe, where's the original art that you and Jack did for Captain America #1? He says, Michael, we had no concept that the art would be of any value whatsoever when it came back from the engraver. I'll tell you where that art went. We used it on our desks to put out cigars, to put coffee cups, and then we used the rest of the art page by page to mop up the excess ink on the floor. Nobody had any sense of history or value. You're absolutely right about that.
I did cut out a patch of that, but I went through the 70s and I don't remember.
I'm actually curious, how'd you meet Ben?
I met Ben because I started working at United Artists when I got out of school. And in my department, a year after me, came Charles Melniker, who became one of my best friends. And when he knew I wanted to leave and do a Batman movie, he said, "Would you like to meet my dad?" I said, "God, your dad's a legend. He's always in Variety and everything. I would love to have an audience. It would be like meeting the Pope." So he arranged for me to go over to the MGM building in New York, and that's how I met Ben. Great question. So,
But you left out
What?
somewhere in between.
You?
You became a lawyer.
oh yeah,
Where
that.
that went.
In the middle of all that.
Yeah, because I had to stay out of Vietnam, and that would give me my 2S student deferment and keep it going, and because when in my senior year, how are we doing? Okay, in my senior year of college, I sent out 372 resumes to try to get a creative job in the movie or television industry. This was before computers. We had these things called typewriters, which were about this big. And you know what? Okay. So I had to hand type 372 cover letters and send them out. I got 2 responses. One was from New York. ICM offered me a job in their mailroom, in their agent training program in New York, that I would spend 2 years in the mailroom, 2 years as a secretary, and then if things worked out, could possibly become an agent. And they would start me at $95 a week, which I didn't think I could live on in New York successfully since I wanted to get married that summer. The other job came from LA.
Hawkins below Houston Street.
Even back then, it wasn't happening.
You need just to go in scarier neighborhoods.
There were plenty of scary neighborhoods actually back then. That's when Hell's Kitchen
Yeah,
was
I
still
know.
Hell's
I
Kitchen and
remember.
not Barbie's
I
Kitchen.
just remember all the punk musicians who talk about how cheap it was.
There were wild days. They were great days though. In LA, a producer at Universal who had done a lot of the big disaster movies said, "Come out, I'll make you my production assistant." I said, "What's the job description?" He laughed. He said, "Well, you'll go for coffee and you'll do a lot of photocopying and I'll start you at $95 a week." So that's when it was plan B, and I went to law school. Always have a plan
With
B
the deferment.
or a C and a deferment.
Worth more than 95.
Jesus, yeah, you were there. So that's the answer to Mike's question. So we get the rights to Batman, and I go, "This is going to be a slam dunk." I quit my job, come out to LA, and I said, "The studios are going to line up at my doorstep. How could they not see the potential for sequels and animation and toys and games? It's going to be great." We were turned down by every single studio in Hollywood. We were told this is the worst idea they ever heard. And it was, "Michael, you're crazy. You can't do serious comic book movies. Oh, Michael, you're nuts. You can't do dark superheroes. Michael, you're out of your mind. Nobody's ever turned an old TV series into a movie. It's never happened." My 2 favorite rejections. One came from Columbia Pictures. And I pitched my heart out to this dapper, silver-haired gent who had been there for 25 years. And he said to me, this was the last studio that we were pitching at. This was it. He said, "Michael, you're nuts. Batman will never be successful as a movie because our movie, Annie, didn't do well." So I said, "Well, I don't understand. Are you talking about that little red-headed girl who sings Tomorrow?" He goes, "Yeah." I go, "Well, what does that have to do with Batman?" He said, "Oh, come on, Michael. They're both out of the funny pages." That was my rejection from Columbia. On that final rejection, we walked out of there. Oh, I should tell you this part. The guy knew Ben from the good old days. He says, "Ben, if you guys really want to make a Batman movie, we'll consider doing one with you, but it's got to be that funny pot-bellied pow zap wham guy from TV, because that's the only Batman audiences will remember and love." And I said to him, "No." And he sat down right in front of me, looked at me, and he goes, "Son," and you know you're in trouble when anyone starts with the word son. "Son," he goes, "better to have a movie made than no movie at all." And I looked at him and I said, "No." After that meeting, that was it. We covered all the studios. We're sitting on a bench on the studio lot. I'm despondent. Ben turns to me, he goes, you know, Michael, I thought it was pretty ironic that the final no we got came from you. And he said, you know what you are? I said, yeah, Ben, I'm an idiot. He says, no. He says, you're Batman's Batman. He says, you're protecting him. You're defending him. You have this vision, and let's just get our act together and go out and find other sources and other ways to get this done, and let's get on it. And he really, that day, picked me up from the dregs. Yeah.
What else was Benjamin working on at this time?
He had just invented the Canadian tax shelter deal and had done 2 pictures under that. One was called Mitchell. One was called Shoot with Cliff Robertson, Linda Evans, and was working on another picture based on the Lufthansa robbery at Kennedy Airport, which eventually, as you know, was made. Yeah.
Was the Lufthansa one, was that the one, was that like, oh God, because I know there's like some Toronto noir that has a cult following. I can't think of the name of it.
Not sure about that one. But yeah, so Ben was still very active doing all kinds of things. Yeah.
Oh, hi. I see your documentaries about Batman.
Yeah.
Question. I heard when Michael Keaton was first cast as Batman, how aggressive were you about the casting of Michael Keaton?
I was apoplectic, which takes us right to Tim Burton. So let me address that whole thing. So we had been at this for years and years and years. Do you know what it's like? 10 years from the time we bought the rights till we were able to get the first movie out. 10 years. Think for 1 second. I want you to all think where you were 10 years ago.
10 years in the making. You already have your tagline.
It is a good tagline. But when you think about 10 years previous, it really kind of resonates with you, especially if you're younger. So Tim Burton waltzes into our lives around 1986. This young genius, and I don't use the word genius very often. There have been 5 geniuses in my 43 years in the business that I've had the pleasure of working on projects with. So Tim comes in, and it's Tim Burton who has the big idea. And when I say big idea, I mean big idea. This is not only the idea that we used for Batman 1989, which revolutionized what comic book movies are and how superheroes can be perceived. It changed Hollywood permanently. It opened the door to Marvel. And it was an amazing, amazing moment. And it came down to this. And let's go with Michael Keaton. I have to back it up once. We're going to do Joker, then Michael Keaton, and then the big idea. May 1980, New York City. It's Memorial Weekend. I get the afternoon paper, get on the bus back to New Jersey, open it up to the movie section. There's 2 big movies opening that weekend. One is called The Empire Strikes Back. One is called The Shining. And I look, and for the first time, I see this picture of Jack Nicholson, like peering around a doorway, totally maniacal. It's called the Here's Johnny shot, if you know what I'm talking about. I go, oh my God, this is the only actor who could play the Joker. I tore it out. As soon as I got home, I ran to my desk. I took whiteout. You guys know what whiteout is? Okay. I whited out Jack's face. I took a red pen. I did his lips. I took a magic marker. I did his hair. That's what I showed Tim and everybody from Warner Brothers why Jack Nicholson was the only actor who could play the Joker. And by the way, in my memoir, The Boy Who Loved Batman.
I was just looking for, I said, didn't he write a memoir? I've got to find it.
Well, thank you for that. As Stan Lee would tell me, Michael, whenever the hell you could get a plug-in, get the plug-in. So the book was just published yesterday. It's a new revised edition that takes us right up to the opening of Joker. And right after this, I'm going to be doing a signing at booth 1013 if you're interested in picking up a copy.
Okay.
Did it, Stan? It's okay.
Hardcover or paperback?
Paperback version. So we have Nicholson. And then comes the call from one of my favorite studio execs who says, Michael, what do you think of Tim's new idea, having Michael Keaton play Batman? I go, very funny. I said, I've been at this for almost 8 years. Let's get a comedian to play Batman.
Were
I
you
said,
talking Bill Murray at one point?
no.
Okay, because I was heard that.
Yeah, that's been all over the map, yeah.
Didn't seem to jive with your vision. That's
No,
why I'm
no.
asking.
So with this one,
Was Mel Gibson the first choice?
no. So what happened was, Tim Burton wants Michael Keaton. I said, I can see the poster now. Mr. Mom is Batman. That's not exactly my idea of a Dark Knight. And I was so crazy upset. And I met with Tim. And Tim said, Michael, do you agree with me that the idea we had previously that we'd get an unknown actor to play Batman goes out the window now? Now that Nicholson's hired. Nicholson would wipe the screen with an unknown actor. I said, I agree. I buy that. He says, all right, I'm telling you right now as a director, I do not know how to take a serious actor, circa 1988, Dennis Quaid, Harrison Ford, Kevin Costner, and show them getting into a bat suit without getting unintentional laughs from the audience. I don't know how to do it. He goes, but I've worked with Michael Keaton on Beetlejuice. And I'm telling you right now, with Michael Keaton portraying a version of Bruce Wayne that is so driven, so obsessed to the point of being psychotic that audiences will go, oh yeah, that guy would get dressed up as a bat and go out and fight a guy like the Joker.
Median's going dark.
Well, Clean and Sober hadn't been out yet. So he immediately set up for me to see a rough cut of Clean and Sober. I came back and said, all right, I take it all back. The guy is a really terrific, serious actor. I said, but Tim, he's my height. He's got a receding hairline. He doesn't have the muscles. And for God's sake, he doesn't have the square jaw of a Batman. And he said to me, Michael, going from one medium to another, a square jaw does not a Batman make. He goes, what you have to understand now, if we're going to do this revolutionary, serious and dark, first ever superhero movie, this movie cannot be about Batman. And at that moment in time, I almost melted right into the ground. He goes, this movie has got to be about Bruce Wayne. Folks, that's the big idea. That's the whole thing right there. Think about the impact of what Tim said to me at that moment in time as it came out in the '89 movie. You've seen Iron Man's, right? You saw the last one. It shouldn't be called Iron Man. It should be called Tony Stark. You've seen the last couple of Spider-Mans. It really should be called Peter Parker. That's the big change, the big idea. And there's a corollary to it. Tim said the other thing is the world building. From the opening frames of this movie, we must convince audiences to believe in Gotham City. Because if they don't suspend their disbelief and believe in Gotham, they will never then be able to believe in a guy dressed as a bat fighting a guy who looks like a Joker.
I just heard Robert Wool on a podcast talking about how great it was to go to work on that set every morning.
I have some
You
great
show
Robert
up
Wool
there,
stories.
Wow.
He's wonderful.
He's a great raconteur.
Yeah.
As yourself.
Sir?
If I might interject
Sir.
for a moment, I worked on Clean and Sober with Mr. Keaton. I was the unit publicist on Clean and Sober. And from there, the next film that Michael did was called The Dream Team, which we filmed in 1988. And I remember very, very clearly going into an elevator with Michael. And he said, Mike, guess what I'm going to play next? I said, okay, tell me.
I love the voice, by the way.
Batman. No, he didn't say it that way, but I was one of the first people he told that he was going to be Batman, and after I picked up my jaw from the ground.
Were you as shocked as I was, Mike?
Yes, and I believe I called you after that, and I said, are you serious?
Why so serious?
Yeah. So that was, and then several months later, I found myself at Pinewood visiting the set of Batman.
I remember
We
that.
were in the art museum,
Mm-hmm.
and I walked into the room. I had been escorted by Mr. Nicholson, with whom I had also worked, and standing up on the upper level, there was Michael in his Batman outfit. And he looked around and he saw me down there. And just for me, he went, And then turned away and went through his business.
That's funny.
Yeah, I was at a PR screening of Dream Team.
The greatest moment I remember with Michael was we were having lunch in the executive dining room at Pinewood, and Michael came in. His cowl was off, but he had the costume on and the black. And I was there with my family. My son was 8, my daughter was 4 at the time, and Sarah was having a very bad day. There was nothing we could do to bring her out of it. And as Michael walks by, he looks at her sitting there mopey like that, and he goes, "Sarah, what's the matter with you?" And she looks up. She goes, And Michael sat in her lap and then stuck his finger into her mashed potatoes and took a chunk of it and just threw it at her. And then he took a couple of peas and started to flick them at her, and she then took a handful of peas and threw them at him, and the two of them had a food fight, and then Batman went on, and my daughter was great for the rest of the day. I owe him one for that. By the way, the scene where he goes on the rooftop on Batman, we were all up on that rooftop, which was a fake rooftop, and my kids were with me, and Sarah, she had a head of curls like Shirley Temple. She's right under his right elbow as they're filming that. I mean, right under it when he does this whole thing. And every time I see it on the big screen, I am looking so hard for just a little bit of my daughter's curls to pop up in there. Anyway, so the next important thing is script comes in. Sam Hamm has one line describing Gotham City to the effect, Gotham City as if hell has erupted from under the earth. My dear friend, Anton Furst, was our production designer, genius number 2 in this whole story. Anton says to Tim, "I don't understand what this means." Tim says to Anton, "I think it means New York City had there never been planning and zoning." Anton says, "I get that." Goes off, studies conflicting styles of architecture, comes back with the whole plan laid out. Gotham City, the Batmobile, the whole look at the picture. And I contend, folks, to this very day, every movie, every genre picture still opening is still, you can see the influence of Tim Burton's vision. You can see the influence of Anton Furst's Gotham City design work, and you can hear the influence of Danny Elfman's notes. They really resonate. It's one of the reasons that picture doesn't feel like an 80s picture. There's a timelessness to it that really holds up well.
Yeah, he stole from better people.
Everybody steals.
I'm not
It depends on how creatively
He's
you
the
do
first
it.
name
Well,
that
you
brought
can
up
hide it,
here
that's
that I look askance at.
You are entitled.
What happened to Anton Furst? I mean, did he just, his life go down, something happened, I mean, he checked out?
It's a very complicated story. Very complicated story. If you saw Joker, you understand that if mental health issues are not addressed by society and by families, then everything can fall apart.
Somebody that talented is just a shame.
I still haven't gotten over that.
And he did it off of a car park, which is so
So
ironic.
the one point I want to make, the movie comes out, we break every box office record, which was fine. The magical summer of 1989, you could not walk across Times Square in New York 20 steps without seeing somebody wearing a Batman t-shirt or a Batman hat. Billboards, posters everywhere. Didn't have the name of the movie on it initially, just a gold oval with a black bat that said June 23rd. Probably the best traditionally marketed movie in history. Movie's open 2 weeks, my phone rings. It's the Annie guy from 10 years ago. I pick it up. He goes, "Michael, I'm just calling to congratulate you on the success of Batman. I always said you were a visionary." Epiphany 3. If you don't believe them when they tell you how bad you are and how your work sucks, but then don't believe them when they start telling you how wonderful you are and how great all of your ideas are, and just believe in yourself and in your work, you'll do
When
fine.
they tell you it's no good, that's a good sign.
I've learned to interpret it that way. It's called negative reinforcement.
It sucks. Oh, all right, I'm on the right side.
Absolutely. So, quickly, we jump ahead in time, and genius number 3 arrives on the scene. And genius number 3 has a job to do. Christopher Nolan wanted to restore the darkness and dignity to Batman. He wanted to make a real Batman, something grounded in reality. And he had some very, very tough challenges vis-a-vis you folks, because he wanted to convince you that Gotham City could be real, not built on 5 square city blocks on the back lot of Pinewood, but that it could be a real city. He wanted to convince you that Bruce Wayne could be a traumatized young man on a Lost Horizon type journey of self-discovery, who would come back and actually could put on the armor and go out and do this. He wanted to convince you the Joker could be real today, because we are no longer in that black and white world of good versus evil with the Joker, the clown prince of crime. Joker now was a homicidal maniac. And we're in a gray world. It's order versus chaos. He had to respond to that. And lastly, how does he convince you all the tech and all these crazy gadgets are real? First thing he did, he chose Chicago, not New York, to be Gotham City. You take 2 iconic buildings out of the skyline in Chicago, most people around the world cannot identify the city. It was easy for them to believe in Gotham as a real city. Number 2, with an incredible performance he crafted with Christian Bale, it was a Bruce Wayne that audiences of every generation could identify with and relate to. Number 3, in the performance of A Lifetime by Heath Ledger, crafted between Heath and Chris Nolan, you believed that the Joker could be a modern-day terrorist, and he was frickin' scary. Hardest one of all, how could he convince you all that all this gadget and tech could be real? He hired Morgan Freeman to tell you it was real. I mean, if Morgan Freeman says it's true, by God, it's true.
Was that his rationale for hiring Morgan Freeman?
That is what I believe his rationale was.
When you hear the armor, it's titanium tri-weave fibers and everything. It's like, yep, that's how it would work.
Of course, just like in the comic books when Stan used to say, oh, it's made out of unstable molecules. That was always his answer at Marvel.
That was post-Stan.
Or we also had, in comic books, well, what we have to do is reverse the polarity, whatever the hell that means.
And nth metal and stuff like that.
It's funny how that all happens. Yeah.
I know you talked about the Chris Nolan Batman trilogy, and I thought it was pretty good, but do you have time to talk about Joe Schumacher's Batman movies?
Okay, real quickly, because we have 2 minutes left. So here's what we're going to do. We're not going to talk about Batman. We're going to talk right now about the motion picture industry and studios generally, okay? Everybody understand that?
You know, leave us with a bummer.
So generally, in the motion picture industry, what used to be just movie studios today are international conglomerates. They own many different companies. Many wheels have to be greased. Some own toy companies or t-shirt companies or theme parks. Sometimes, generally, in the motion picture industry, executives get very enamored with merchandising and toys and Happy Meals. When they become so enamored of that, generally, in the motion picture industry, and dictate to filmmakers that the toy companies need a minimum of 3 heroes and 3 villains in a movie, each one must have 2 costume changes in 2 vehicles, my opinion is the tail is now wagging the dog. You are no longer making films, you are making 2-hour infomercials for toys. And if instead you were to find filmmakers who had an understanding, love, and passion for a character, who had a vision for a character, and who you believe could execute that vision and just made great stories, great movies, you will sell toys anyway. Especially if directors are told you will make movies that are light, bright, kiddie-friendly, and family-friendly, and cater to the merchandising division. That's my thoughts about the motion picture industry generally. Sorry I couldn't answer your question about
Has
that.
that changed a little bit, though? Because
It varies.
in the last 30 years, in the beginning, like when your movie came out, you could go to Toys R Us and it was. Now, there isn't even a toy store around. And I know it's all online, that's a different thing. But,
Yeah.
But something has changed. Something is not.
No, they
I don't
still
see
use the word
same
toyetic.
creativity.
Yeah, everything changes
Yeah.
so rapidly, it's stunning. I don't know if it is as stunning to you as it is to me.
Oh,
The
yeah.
movie industry, the TV industry are changing at like a revolutionary pace. Your kids, or grandkids, depending on your age, they might not even know the word television as opposed to streaming. They may come to you one day and sit on your lap and go, Grandma, Grandpa, is it true they forced you to watch a certain TV show like at 9 o'clock on a Monday night?
I call that linear.
my
I
kids
call that
can't
linear
grasp that.
programming because the television is still an actual physical item, but just like linear programming. That's how I call it with some people.
It's a valid point. So everything is changing. So I've been given the hex sign that I thank you for coming out. I'm glad we could have an intimate little talk. If you'd like to get a book signed or anything signed, including arms and legs, I'll be at 10:13 from about 5:30 to 7 o'clock tonight. Thanks for coming out. I really appreciate it.
Is that number again?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks.